Hey there, my name is Meg. I'm an instructor for McDowell Environmental Center, and I am here to talk to you about frog and toad calls. Yes! So it is the very beginning of frog and toad season here in Alabama. So if you're joining me for this video, you have an entire season of frog and toad calls to listen to for the rest of the year. If you go out and listen to some of them right now, you may hear some specific species, but if you go back out a little later in the summer, you may hear completely different ones, or you may hear more frog calls. So frog season here in Alabama is from early spring to late summer. So you have all of that time to go out and hear some of these very, very wild calls for yourself. I really like observing frogs with my ears in particular because it's pretty hard to observe them with your eyes, in my opinion. They camouflage really well with their colors and their markings and their patterns. They're by design built to camouflage into the environments that they live in, which would be wetland areas. They're also really flighty and skittish. So if you go up to one, it may try to get away from you and hop away or jump in the water or something like that, and then you don't get to see it as well. So that's why I really like to listen to them instead. You get to hear them and can actually learn to identify the species that they are from their very distinct calls, which is pretty interesting to me. Now you might be wondering, why am I so obsessed with frogs and toads? Why do I want you to go out and look for frogs and toads yourself? Well, you may be surprised to learn that real scientists collect data on frogs and toads because it can inform them of the health of a watershed or a wetlands area and the ecosystems that they inhabit. Frogs and toads are both indicator species. Actually, other amphibians as well, like salamanders and newts, are also indicator species because they're sensitive to changes in the water. So if you're a scientist and you observe a change in the patterns of the frog and toad populations in a certain area, it might be an indication that the ecosystem has changed in some way, or like the water quality has changed in some way. But also, even if you're not a scientist, they're just so fun to listen to and learn about, because if I were to ask you what kind of sound a frog makes, you might say ribbit. But none of the frogs here in Alabama say ribbit. None of them at all. They have very interesting, very unique, totally wild and crazy calls to me. So with that in mind, I want to share a few examples of some of my favorite frog and toad calls with you. To start off, why don't we start off with a classic, the American bullfrog. Pretty crazy, right? Definitely doesn't sound like a ribbit to me. It sounds a little bit more like a revving engine. It's low in pitch, it's a little growly, and once again, certainly does not sound like a ribbit to me. Let's listen to that one more time, the American bullfrog. Pretty intense, pretty crazy. Now, American bullfrogs can actually get pretty big. If you think about your favorite sandwich that's nice and stacked high, and you have to hold it like this, it's so big, bullfrogs can actually get to be that size. They can get to be pretty large. So they're pretty great frogs to observe if they're in your area. Next, why don't we look at one that has a few different common names. I've heard them called a green frog, a bronze frog, and a banjo frog. Let's give it a listen. Sounds a little bit like a plucked string instrument, doesn't it? Thump. So that's why that one is sometimes called a banjo frog, depending on the area that you live in, but it can also be called a green frog or a bronze frog. And those are a little smaller than American bullfrogs. I'd say that they could get to be about the size of your hand or so. So let's listen to the banjo frog one more time. Pretty wild. Sounds like an instrument. So interesting. Alrighty, let's look at a toad now, since we've been talking about frogs so much. This is one of the first frogs and toads that I ever saw here when I moved to Camp McDowell last season, and it's called a Fowler's toad. Sounds a little bit like a tiny airplane perhaps, or like a tiny sheep. Wah. And it's very high in pitch and very nasally. All right, let's try the Fowler's toad one more time. pretty silly, pretty funny. Now, Fowler's toads are a little bit smaller. I'd say that they could get to be a couple of inches in length or so, and they blend in perfectly with the sandy soil here at Camp McDowell. Let's do another one. How about let's try the spring peeper? These are one of my favorites. So as the name implies, that kind of high-pitched peepee sound, that's the sound of a spring peeper. It's high in pitch, and actually, as the sound of the spring peeper might imply, spring peepers are very, very small. I would say that they maybe get to be an inch, inch and a half length in total. So let's try the spring peeper sound one more time. So cute, so adorable. Now the very last one is probably my favorite one that I've ever heard. I didn't hear this one until I was here at Camp McDowell. This one is called a southern cricket frog. Believe it or not, the sound that you're gonna hear is the sound of a frog. So that clicking sound, to me it sounds like two marbles clicking together, is a frog, which is so wild and so crazy to me. Very, very far from that ribbit automatopoeia that we're always hearing, right? And once again, as the sound kind of implies, southern cricket frogs are very, very small. They maybe don't even get above an inch in length. So let's try the southern cricket frog one more time, that clicky sound. Absolutely wild. I love it. So interesting. So that was just a very small selection of some of the frogs and toads that you can hear here in Alabama. If you go out and observe some of these sounds for yourself, you may hear some of these calls, but you may hear completely different ones based on where you're living, which is really great and really exciting. So I highly recommend that you go out and try to hear some of these sounds yourself. If you do go out and hear some of these sounds, I have some good practice tips for you. You don't really have to travel anywhere in particular to observe any of these frogs or toads. Frogs and toads can live in our backyards, they can live in our neighborhoods, and you don't necessarily have to go and visit like a pond or a lake. Take a special trip to hear any of these. You can hear them right in our living spaces very, very easily. You will want to observe them on a warm evening, and you'll also want to observe them about 30 minutes after sunset because frogs and toads are nocturnal, meaning that they're most active at nighttime. So if you go out on a warm evening and you're sure that the sun is down, you'll probably get the most bang for your buck as far as hearing different frog and toad sounds goes. And if you go out and you don't hear any sounds immediately, just slow down a little bit, maybe pause and be quiet for a couple of minutes, and more frogs and toads will most likely start calling. As I mentioned before, frogs and toads are a little flighty, they're a little skittish. So if you make some noise in the area that they're living in, they might quiet up a little bit because they don't want you to know that they're there. But if you slow down a little bit, wait for a couple of minutes, they'll get a little more accustomed to your presence and start calling a little bit more. On a similar note, I might recommend that you silence your cell phone or something like that while you're out. So with that, I would love to just share a couple of resources with you. The whole reason that I love frogs and toads so much is because of a really great citizen science program called Frogwatch USA. It is a citizen science program where you can be trained to be a volunteer and make real observations for real scientists that are going to benefit real scientists and inform them of the frog and toad populations in your area. You can be certified to be a volunteer at any local Frogwatch chapter. So here in Alabama, Auburn University in Auburn has a chapter. In Mobile, the Environmental Studies Center also has a chapter. And if you're in Birmingham, the Birmingham Zoo and Rufter Mountain also have chapters that you could be potentially certified at. But even if you don't get certified, if you go to their website, which is aza.org/frogwatch, you can go there and see past data sheets, get more resources about frogs and toads, and just kind of get your brain going for if you would like to become a volunteer in the future. And then lastly, we're gonna leave a link in the description of this video to a quiz from the U.S. Geological Services. They have a quiz set up that you can put in the state that you live in and then actually take a quiz on the frogs and toads that are in Alabama as a whole. So once again, the frogs and toads that I shared with you in this video, it's a teeny tiny little slice of the pie of all of the frog and toad calls that we can find here in Alabama. So I hope that you enjoyed this video. I hope that you'll go out and try this for yourself, and you should let us know if you find anything. We'd be happy to hear it. So thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you soon. Bye.